Ever since I opened this channel, my most watched videos have been my Mount and Blade videos. Since you like them so much, you might also want to hear my thoughts on Mount and Blade. I originally started this channel to make review videos, but before starting to review videos, I created some music mixes to attract viewers and get more views for the channel. If you continue to request it, these music mixes will keep coming. If I see that they are not being watched, I won't continue making them. Now let's move on to Warband, but before we do, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss my future bannerlord review. When I was a child, I had an interest in close combat. Whether it was fighting on the street for silly reasons or playing Counter-Strike on the computer, I always looked for melee combat games. Wouldn't it be great if there was a game where we could swing swords like that and it was in first-person perspective? By the time I reached the age of 14, I encountered Warband. My story of getting to know Warband is a bit long and complex, therefore I'd like to share it with you in another video in the future. Let's dive straight to the game. When I start reviewing a game, I always begin with the storyline. So, how is the storyline in Mount and Blade Warband? In Warband, there's practically nothing in terms of a storyline. Warband is a sandbox FPS action RPG game with a touch of strategy elements. In some games, when there is no strict storyline, there is still a narrative. It shows you the world you're in. But how about story of Warband? Warband takes you to the land of Khergit, which is divided among 6 kingdoms. I'll discuss this in more detail later. Of course, these kingdoms reflect the ones that existed in Europe at a certain time. You create a character whose story is shaped and arrive at one of the capitals of these 6 kingdoms in Khergit. What happens from that point onward depends on what you want to do in Khergit map. So let's start discussing the gameplay. Mount and Blade Warband as an action RPG game successfully combines both action and role-playing elements. As you step into the lands of Khergit, your pockets contain a certain amount of money based on your chosen background from your previous life, as well as equipment and items determined by your past experience. Your objective in the game is to essentially rise from almost nothing and become a significant figure in Khergit. However, despite the game not explicitly supporting it, players often take different paths. You might find those who focus solely on making one city the best in all of Khergit without engaging in any battles except defending their castles. Or you might encounter individuals who attack everyone they see like a hungry dog, ultimately becoming the enemy of Khergit and even its sole king. Alternatively, some players might immerse themselves in trade, becoming the richest person in Khergit. Of course, there are limitations to what you can do in the game, considering it was released in 2010 with a relatively small budget. Still, the fact that you can embark on so many diverse paths is quite an achievement. The game subtly guides you down a certain path. First, you down with a militia-based army and face simple bandits. As you develop this army, you choose a kingdom to oppose and eventually find yourself allied with a different kingdom against that chosen one. You work to impress their kings in order to become a vassal under their rule. Finally, you become a lord and acquire your own land. With each passing day, your territory expands and you become the most powerful lord in your chosen kingdom. Later, you aim to woo a woman, preferably with many relatives, go to great lengths to win her over. You recite poems and seemingly have no other obligations as you secretly meet her in a castle or city based on her frequent calls. Amid all this, your only concern seems to be hoping she don't get married off to someone else and maybe beating up any other man who flirt with her. Once you convince her to marry you, you grow closer to her family. Eventually, you engage in warfare against your current kingdom to establish your own. If you prove your power to your relatives, they'll stand by your side. Before you know it, you become the king of your own kingdom. After that, your final task is to conquer all of Khergit. I have mentioned what you need to do in the game, but of course we also need to talk about the gameplay aspects that are crucial. First and foremost, this game is about action. In an action game, it's essential to have smooth combat mechanics and impactful combat sensations to truly enjoy the action. The combat mechanics in the game are actually quite good. You have 3 categories of weapons: one-handed melee weapons, two-handed melee weapons, pole arms, ranged weapons including bows and crossbows, and throwable weapons. I usually prefer to wield a sword in one hand, a shield in the other, and use a bow and arrow as a secondary weapon. The sword is always faster, and the shield provides protection against distant threats like arrows or thrown weapons like axes or javelins. Using a bow and arrow as a secondary weapon makes it easier to take down distant enemies and ensures start battles with 1 or 2 fewer foes. Crossbows are powerful but have a long reload time, and I don't prefer throwable weapons as they run out quickly. I'd like to focus on one particular weapon, the lances, that enables you to perform couched land attacks. The couched land attack can be the strongest offensive move in the game. It can only be executed while on horsebacks. It's challenging to perform and it goes on cooldown after use, but it's very potent. When hit by a couched land attack from a cavalry, you're almost guaranteed to be severely injured. Speaking of horses, yes, horses are a part of the game, and not just in the way that only you can ride them. The kingdoms in the game can also have very powerful cavalry units. Let's say you armed yourself in Khergit. Where are you going to find an army? This brings us to the topic of locations. In Khergit, apart from training grounds of course, there are 3 types of locations: villages, castles, and towns. Villages are places where a population resides, but they often don't feel very lively. When you enter a village, you'll find characters milling about. Here, you can gather militia forces. Don't be confused by the term militia. Think of it as villagers equipped with low quality weapons fighting for you. These modest units can gradually become more experienced through battles or training, the latter of which I'll discuss shortly, evolving into skilled warriors and eventually formidable forces. For instance, the game's weakest village units, such as the Sarranid or Khergit villages, can evolve into Sarranid Memluk cavalry or Khergit horse archers with enough experience. Facing a group of 20 or 25 Khergit horse archers can lead to a downfall of your entire army. This is one of the aspects that makes Warband unique. You can turn simple villagers into war machines. What's even better is that there is always a faction another faction struggles against. Like all locations, villages also have their perspective on you. By improving their view of you, you can gain more militia soldiers and enjoy discounts on their goods when you trade with them. Castles, on the other hand, are locations where villages are usually affiliated and they have their own garrison, but their functions are limited. Khergit has many castles scattered around, and as countries lose these castles, their decline begins. Our third and most significant location is town. Towns are heavily fortified places, acting as both castles and villages, They are easy to defend but difficult to conquer. In towns, you'll find shops selling weapons, armor, mounts, and the necessary provisions for your party. Moreover, there is an inn where you can recruit mercenaries and companions, which I'll discuss shortly. And if there are ongoing tournaments, you can participate and potentially earn significant amounts of money with your bets and skills. The factions, of course, are the ones that hold these locations. Although the game uses the term faction, it's evident that these are kingdoms. There are a total of 6 kingdoms in the game. Let's talk about them. The first kingdom is the Khergit Khanate, clearly inspired by the Mongols. From a historical perspective, they resemble the Ilkhanate Mongols. Just as the Mongol invasion happens in real history, fighting against Khergits feels the same. They have armies composed entirely of mounted units and extremely annoying mounted archers, which can become a serious threat in open field battles. However, they are not effective in castle sieges. During castle sieges, everyone, including mountain characters, fighting on foot, and most Khergit close combat units either lack shields or ranged weapons, causing their effectiveness to dwindle. Their armor isn't particularly strong either. This means that when you besiege a Khergit castle or town, especially with skilled crossbowmen like the Rhodoks or skilled melee fighters like the Nords, it's not too challenging. However, the problem arises when you begin a siege. You construct siege towers, or if lucky, siege ladders, and while ladders might be relatively quick to set up, constructing siege towers takes a long time. During the process, a Khergit lord might find you out in the open and engage you in battle, potentially destroying your army. The best approach against the Khergits is likely to launch coordinated attacks on their castles. Our next kingdom is the Kingdom of Nords. The Nords in the game reflect the Vikings or Scandinavian people in our reality. They are a true Viking faction, predominantly wielding axes and wearing weird and cool helmets. Unlike most other factions, they lack mounted units. I consider the Nords to have the most potent melee infantry in the game. The Nord Hussars, their elite melee infantry, are remarkably powerful, and the best counter to them is heavily armored cavalry. Unfortunately, even the Khergits struggle against them, so you'll need to charge Sarranid Mamluks or Swadia knights at them to have a chance of eliminating them. They are often unbeatable in infantry to infantry combat as well. Even in Tier 3 units, the Nord trained footmen can be considered quite formidable. Another kingdom that relies solely on infantry is the Rhodok kingdom. They are formidable Rhodok sergeants in close combat, and Rhodok sharpshooters, when well positioned in castles defense or on terrain with many hills, can devastate enemies. You can liken the Rhodoks to the Byzantine Empire. The kingdom of Swadia could be thought of as the Holy Roman Empire in this game. There are settlements with names like Oxal, Suna, and Preven suggest a connection to the Germanic region in our reality. Swadia has the most balanced army in the game. There are powerful infantry at the highest tier, decent crossbowmen, and Swadian knights, who are one of the strongest cavalry units in the game, makes their kingdom quite formidable. However, due to their geographical position, surrounded by enemies on three sides, and the constant feasts and lack of proper warfare by King Harlows, Swadia tends to crumble quickly in the game. But if managed properly, it can become very strong. I will explain how to manage it effectively in a moment. Kingdom of Vaegirs resembles the Slavs or even the Principality of Muscovy in our reality. They are essentially the game's representation of the Russians. While I don't prefer them, they have decent archers and powerful infantry, along with strong cavalry. If you want to play the Vaegir way, fill your castles with Vaegir guard units and assemble your main army with Vaegir knights to dominate your enemies. Lastly, the Sarranid Sultanate, representing the Arabs in the game, is known for its exceptionally strong Sarranid Mamluks. While they are successful in the aspect, their archers and equally skilled infantry are not as powerful. In my review, Sarranids reflects the Abbasid Caliphate in the game. Let's say you have managed to prove yourself to one of these kings and they grant you a village in return. If you consistently excel in battles, you can be appointed as a marshal. Becoming a marshal allows you to command the entire army of your kingdom. This is what I meant by if managed properly when discussing the Kingdom of Swadia. However, you might not want to be bound to any kingdom. You might aspire to become a king yourself. To become a king in Warband, all you need to do is capture a castle or a town while being independent of any existing kingdom. Villagers cannot be captured on their own. At most, you can raid them for their goods and sell them elsewhere. When you capture a castle or a town, the game will soon prompt you to name your kingdom kingdom, and if you haven't already, select a banner. If you manage to convince lords from other kingdoms to join you, you can reward them with the newly acquired lands and thus relieve yourself of the responsibility of defending every territory. However, this isn't always easy, especially when your kingdom is still small. Lords aren't always quickly to align with you. In that case, the solution is to grant land to your companions in the game. You can find companions who will accompany you for a fee or sometimes for free at the inns in towns. They can assist you based on their abilities. Your companions can have conflicts or even develop affection for each other. Among the companions, some of my favorites are as follows. Bunduk, as a crossbowman, can be quite successful in assisting you if you're planning to establish an archer unit. He can effectively perform the role of your lieutenant. Catherine, being both a trader and capable of wielding a crossbow to great effect when developed. She is a successful companion at all. Her good rapport with Bunduk also adds to her value. Jeremus, as your party's medic, prevents your soldiers from dying easily, particularly when developed. Moreover, he accurates your recovery rate. Ymira, in short, serves as Jeremus' assistant in nursing. When developed, she can even surpass Jeremus in her skills. Lastly, Alayan excels in close combat and can perform marvelously in battles. You have many companions like these, and you can grant them land or establish connections to obtain general information from various countries. For instance, Bunduk is a Rhodok. He can get news from the Rhodoks, allowing you to learn about their current situation. You can gather information about how lords are faring among themselves, their perspective towards their kings, and so on. While you can grant lands to every companion, it's best not to do so. In the game, if you grant land to noble companions, nobody would find it odd. But if you give land to non-noble companions, other lords' opinions of you will decrease. I mentioned the game's action and strategy aspects. However, this game is also an RPG. Like an RPG, when you start the game, it prompts you to shape your character and directs you to the character screen divided into 3 sections. As you level up, you'll revisit this character screen multiple times. Attributes provide you with 4 fundamental abilities: strength, agility, intelligence, and charisma. Each of these attributes offers distinct advantages. As their names imply, additionally, the game provides a clear explanation within the character screen. Some armor in the game cannot be worn if you don't have enough strength, and certain books cannot be read if you lack the required intelligence. At the start of the game, you might consider investing in intelligence since it grants you an extra skill point. However, don't forget to allocate points to your other attributes as well. Your skills, which have a cap on how much you can improve based on your attributes, form a significant part of the RPG aspect of the game. There are numerous skills and I won't be able to cover all of them, but I can discuss skill types. Party skills affects your entire party. Remember, I mentioned earlier that companions like Jeremus serves as the medic for your party. Your companions also have their own character sheets, which contributes to your overall success. They even level up over time, and you can develop them in the way you prefer. You also have leader skills, similar to party skills, but they are unique to the leader. Finally, you possess personal skills, which are specific to your character. Proficiencies are the part that determines how effectively you can wield weapons, divided into 3 categories for melee and ranged weapons. This skill tree improves as you use weapons. However, each time you level up, you can allocate 10 points to your proficiency. And if you also raise your agility attribute, you can invest a total of 15 points. This allows you to become significantly better with the weapon you use. It's a useful method, especially if you start with a different weapon and later find a powerful ranged weapon, so you don't end up being unskilled, Let's touch on graphics. Of course, the graphics aren't particularly impressive for a 2010 game. They resemble more of a game from 2004, However, considering it's an indie game, the graphics aren't hard on the eyes, I generally don't emphasize graphics much when reviewing game of this style, technical specifications. Nowadays, it might not always be straightforward to download and run older games, yet Warband doesn't cause many problems in this regard. Once you download the game and set your resolution and graphic settings, the game tends to run smoothly. I have been playing this game since around 2013 or 2014 or something, and I haven't encountered any major bugs or game-breaking issues. The only thing I have noticed is that I enjoy listening to podcasts while playing Warband, and if you Alt plus Tab during the initial loading screen, the game can crash. Aside from that, I don't believe there are any significant technical issues. In terms of sound and music, the game is a bit peculiar. I appreciate all of its music. However, the sound effects in the game are a bit odd. They don't quite establish the atmosphere or sound high quality. The game is mostly silent, and on the battlefield, the weapon sounds are fine, but characters can make some interesting noises like this.
We'll have our pay, or we'll have our fun.
Huh? My lord?
My lord?
I will drink from your skull! Today the gods will decide your fate!
That's a nice head you have on your shoulders.
Hail to you, brother of war! My sword is my life and honor.
After all this time, playing Warband with a reviewing perspective was quite intriguing. The game certainly has many issues. This game, which can be quite challenging. I now play on the easiest settings because I no longer desire a challenging experience. I was already satisfied with conquering all of Calradia under the Khergit Khanate on the highest difficult settings, so in that case I had my satisfaction, Therefore, whenever I enter the game, it's for a fantasy. For instance, conquering all of Calradia using only mercenaries, taking over a city with cheats help, filling it enough troops to defend it, and then conquering all of Calradia with the armies of your lords. In my opinion, this game is tailor-made for someone new to the RPG genre. Initially, you can play with the simplest settings and later choose to make this game more challenging if you wish.